The adventurers have survived the haunted graveyard. Well, mostly survived. Where do they go to next? Where else but the ruined temple in the heart of the old marshes? Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we're looking at our second playtest of We Want the Gold. Hello friends, and thanks for joining me today on Dragon's Teeth. So yes, the second playtest of We Want the Gold. Last time we used that cemetery build. This time I thought we'd go for something, well, similar but a little bit different. And I'm pleased to say that everyone who played in the first game agreed to play in the second. So we kept the same factions, and in effect we've just developed the narrative. We've taken it along to the next scene, if you like. And this is great because for me, one of the ideas behind We Want the Gold was to make it a narrative game. Rather than have just 2 groups or 3 groups, however many, turn up and have a big fight somewhere, I think it's much more interesting if we put these narrative threads in. So you may remember that in the cemetery we had the guards, the naughty guards, who had collected all their bride money, put it in a chest and had hidden it in the cemetery where their friend was pretending to be a ghost. We had the halflings, the sneaky finders, who were coming to look for the treasure because they'd heard about it. We had the necromancer who, well, looking for new friends, looking for spare parts perhaps. We had the vampire hunters under Van Halen, who were searching for the resting place of Count Rammstein. And we had our hairy barbarians, who had a bit of a personal grudge against the guards, so were coming along to sort them out. That all played out last time, and the upshot was that the halflings found the chest and made off with it. The guards and the barbarians had an epic punch-up developed, which was only stopped and interrupted by the rising of several zombies from the ground, which kind of put an end to their fun. The necromancer didn't fare so well. In fact, Nocturnus was killed by a zombie, ironically enough. So yeah, the necromancers had a bit of a tough time, and the vampire hunters didn't find Count Rammstein, but they did manage to put down a few undead, so they didn't do too bad. So what we've done is we've now moved all that on to the next scenario. Now what we have is the sneaky finders. They've got this chest full of loot, but things are getting very hot for them. The guards are very annoyed that someone's nicked their money, so the word is out to get the halflings. They've heard of this old ruined temple in the middle of the marshes, so they've gone there and they've hidden their treasure there. But being the cunning little thieves that they are, they've also made a few dummy stashes as well. So there's a couple of chests buried around that have just got a rude message in, basically. You know, it's halfling humour. So they start at the board. They haven't really gone into the temple. They had a peek through the door and saw a pair of red eyes glowing out of the gloom. So they've stayed out of the temple, but they've buried their chest. They're just getting ready to move off when they hear the arrival of these other groups. So we have the guards coming in, because obviously they're looking for their gold. We have the barbarians who have heard that the guards are going to be here and want to continue their grievance. Now the necromancer, Nocturnus, is gone, but when you're a necromancer, you're never really gone. So his friend, his colleague, the Baron, has assembled a group to come to the temple because they've heard that there's a mummy buried in there, and they need mummy dust as one of the components, one of the ingredients of the spell to revive Nocturnus. So they're after the mummy dust. Professor Van Halen and his crew, well, they're still on the trail of Count Rammstein. Of course, they didn't find him in the cemetery, but they've picked up on another rumour that he might be in the temple. And just to add into all this as well, there's a certain eldritch old tome called the Nookinomicon that the necromancer crew were looking for. Actually, the sneaky finders found that as well. They did very well in that first game. So they've also got possession of this old book. They don't really know what it is. They've tried to sell it. No one wants to touch it. It looks evil. It gives off bad vibes. So they've kept hold of that for the moment. Perhaps this time they can use that as a bargaining chip. I mean, the necromancer is obviously interested in that book, and the vampire hunters will be interested in it as well. Of course, as an evil book, they want to get it and burn it. You know what vampire hunters are like. Anyway, let's see how things played out. Once again, we have Neil playing the guards coming in on the main road there. Then we've got the vampire hunters, played by Paul. Matt is taking on the role of the necromancers again, this time led by the Baron, who has a pet snake. Andy is playing the halflings, the sneaky finders, and as we said at the start there, they begin on the table. They're positioned around the temple. They won't actually go in it though. And we've got Damo in control of the barbarian halls, out for revenge. Here's an overview of the table, then the layout, and you'll recognise some of this scenery if you follow the channel. I've got my marsh pieces, the standing stones, that very nice statue. You'll notice a green counter just in front of the statue there. One thing I did for this game is put little counters out, and each has a letter on, and that relates to what might be in that location. Now that could be treasure, or that could be something quite nasty. There's our cabin, which if you've seen the making of video of that, you'll know there's a vampire lurking in there. And Paul brought in this magnificent temple that he'd built. He said it's been sitting in his garage for a while, so it was suitably dusty and cobwebbed. That really added to the ambience. And there's our table layout. Now the lighting here does start off okay, but it deteriorates a little bit later on as the daylight fades and we're just under fluorescent lights, but I hope you can see everything clearly. I kept the core rules the same for this game because everything was working fine, the activation and everything else was working fine. The only tweaks really were in some of the statistics for the characters, particularly some of the defense factors for the guards were a bit high last time, so I brought those down and evened out the hit points a little bit across the group. Now things didn't start well for the professor. He rolled a 1, slipped into the swamp and was actually attacked by a swarm of swamp rats as he did so. So quite an embarrassing start for the professor. There's the guards moving up the road towards the statue. Remember, they're searching for their treasure. And there's the barbarians across there who are searching for the guards. However, they got into trouble very quickly as well. They had a look in that swamp there and disturbed a large marsh worm. So 3 of them were busy attacking that for a couple of rounds. The necromancers meanwhile are heading straight for the temple, but in order to get there they've got to go past the old cabin. I wonder if they're going to have a look inside. Another thing I added in this time was I got loads of these old business cards, so I thought they'd make great things to write notes on, both for me to give to the players when they search a location, but also I was pleased to see that the players started passing notes between themselves. Some of them were, you know, to parlay or to ask questions. Others were just straight up lewd or insulting comments. I certainly won't be reading those out. But this is great. This is exactly what the game is about. All the players interacting in various ways to help develop and strengthen that narrative. The vampire hunters explore a building and disturb a couple of ghouls. I gave these ghouls the trait of carrying a very powerful stench around themselves, so the characters have to save against fear in order to be able to approach them. As it happened, these are a hardy lot, used to foul beasts, so they got in and within a couple of rounds they'd destroyed the ghouls. Now the thing is with the creatures with this is I don't want to make them too powerful. Certainly they've got to give the characters pause for thought and hold them up, but they're not that powerful that they can destroy the whole party until perhaps later on we get to something like vampires. Perhaps they're going to pose more of a problem. And here's a case of seeing a figure and having to buy it to put into the game. It's a mummified cat. This just fitted the theme perfectly. So here's the eyes and ears of the mummy at the moment. At the approach of all the other factions, the halflings gather together. They have buried the chest in the marsh there, marked A. So they're just really keeping an eye on things. They're ready to retrieve that chest if they need to. Meanwhile, we've got the necromancer crew have moved up to the cabin. Now, you may remember last time, poor old Grond had a bit of trouble finding the door when he was trying to search a mausoleum. Let's hope he has less difficulty getting into the cabin. I mentioned traits for the ghouls there, that stench. The characters can potentially have traits as well. They might be things like nimble, so they get a bonus for climbing, or in the case of the barbarians, one of them is a berserker, or they might be lucky, which means they get to re-roll dice once or twice a game. So all these things can be built into the characters as well. Van Halen and co are just finishing off those ghouls, and we see the guards here have started searching the swamps as well. And this guy with the blue counter next to him just in front there is the unluckiest guard ever. Well, first of all, he's woken up the swamp witch there, who promptly siren sings him to start walking towards her into the murky water. The Baron, meanwhile, as his trusty henchman stand guard, goes into the cabin. What does he find in there? It's a vampire. It's one of the brides of Count Rammstein. Now, this isn't a disaster for the necromancer, because he's a necromancer. He's used to dealing with undead. So where the cleric has the ability to turn undead, a necromancer can actually potentially charm them, or at least talk to them. Unfortunately, he didn't make a very good roll, so while the vampire doesn't attack him, at least, it pretty much disregards him. But this does mean that we now have an awake and hungry vampire on the table. I wonder who she's going to go for. The barbarians, meanwhile, have finished off the worm, so they spread out a little bit. One starts searching round the stones. The other two head for the temple, and we've got one over at the statue there. The statue, that's where the halflings have hidden a dummy chest. So as he searches, he notices that the ground is freshly dug there. Having been cold-shouldered by the vampire, the Baron and his men move up to the temple. They're going to start climbing in there next turn. Meanwhile, let's go back to our unlucky guard. So when we last left him, he was walking towards the witch through the swamp. Luckily, one of the vampire hunters intervened. Solomon fired his crossbow and hit the witch, which broke the spell. So our guard came to waist deep in stagnant water. He rolled to hit, but he rolled a 1, which meant he promptly dropped his sword into the marsh. Now, it got even more unlucky because as the witch was killed, the guard decided he was going to search for his sword. He rolled the dice as a difficult feat, and he rolled a 1 again. So that meant not only did he drop his sword, but as he bent forward to search for it, his helmet slipped off and disappeared into the swamp as well. So he ended up with no sword and no helmet. And in fact, later on, he was throwing punches at barbarians, which was quite brave of him, I suppose. Speaking of which, this is where we started getting the main action between the factions, the guards and the barbarians. Again, another big fight developed between them just on the road here. I would say it was fairly even to start, but the barbarians did start taking casualties. They've just lost one of their number there. The other barbarians, well, we'll see what happened to those in a moment. One of them certainly was otherwise engaged, you might say. And there's Halfling Tommy from the Sneaky Finders shouting across to the Baron. I think he was shouting, "We've got a book you might be interested in." But the Baron pretty much ignored him, I think. There was some mad halfling shouting at him. Meanwhile, Basil, the shaman, he's communing with his familiar, the crow, which that acts as his eyes and ears. The crow was situated just on the other side of the table, so he's basically keeping an eye on what's going on with the other factions. The necromancer group climb into the temple from the other side. They all have to make climb rolls, except for Murphys, who has the trait of nimble. So he springs up and over the rubble like a gazelle. The necromancers are into the temple. And the vampire has decided to stretch her legs. She's come out for a stroll, perhaps a bite to eat. And what does she find but a big juicy barbarian? What does the barbarian do when confronted by this vision? He turns and runs, of course. So she's contemplating her next move. Meanwhile, in the temple, the necromancer crew are in, or at least some of them are. They hear the heavy tread of bandaged feet. And yes, there he is, the mummy, not in rest as they had hoped, but very much alive and swinging. So a fight ensues at the centre of the temple there. Now once again he's dealing with undead here, so the necromancer has a chance to communicate with the mummy. However, we had to take into account that his men had already started attacking it, and even more, we had to take into account the fact that Matt rolled a 1. Yeah, there were several 1s rolled this time, so definitely not communicating with it. In fact, a catastrophic failure. It sent the mummy into a rage. Now, while all this was going on, the cleric and a couple of the other vampire hunters entered the temple from the other end, and this is where Professor Van Halen reached into his jacket and pulled out his dust to dust spell, which destroys undead. So things start looking a bit grim for the mummy. We're into the penultimate round now, and there's a lot going on. Unfortunately, I didn't get much of a chance to film because, it's difficult running the game and filming. So I'll run through what happened, and I'll put up these very nice pictures. Some of these are from Paul, and I think the others are from Damo. So, the vampire, she chased after that barbarian. She has that trait of swiftness. You know that thing where vampires can just glide across the ground and cover a short distance very quickly. So she gets close enough to the barbarian to use her transfix ability. The barbarian fails his saving roll. He is basically stuck to the spot. He drops his sword, he turns to face the vampire, and she approaches for the bite. However, before she can do so, Frau Blucher from the Vampire Hunter team, she sees what's going on, and she makes the most spectacular and cinematic move of the whole game, which was to run out of the temple door, stake in hand, run across the wings of the griffin statue at the front of the temple, make a flying leap, and attempt to plunge the stake into the vampire's heart. Marvellous stuff. Unfortunately, the roll was, it was a partial success. So I adjudicated that Frau Blucher managed to run across. She managed not to fall off the griffin. She managed to make her flying leap. But vampires, of course, have cat-like reflexes. The vampire saw the attack coming and was able to step to the side to avoid a stake through the heart. Meanwhile, the Barbarian Guard's battle continues out the front. Wolfgar, the leader, is now involved, and Bjorn goes berserk, so that might start to swing the fight back towards the Barbarians. Now, the Halflings have left the table, except for Arthur of the Sneaky Finders, who decides to take a parting shot at the guards, charges across the board, hits that guard a couple of times, and then buggers off. And as all that is going on, we see the demise of the mummy. Despite being attacked by a mummified cat, Van Halen launches his dust-to-dust spell. Now, you might remember that one thing that the necromancers were looking for was mummy dust. That was one of their objectives. And it's quite interesting, as 3 of them are fighting this mummy, they're hitting it, not really doing much damage, but it is giving off some dust. So Igor bends to the floor and starts trying to scoop up this dust. Again, not a great roll, so he gets a couple of handfuls, but the necromancer's prayers are about to be answered, because Van Halen's dust-to-dust spell hits, the mummy fails its saving roll, and literally explodes in a cloud of dust. So those 3 necromancer team members are now absolutely smothered in mummy dust. They can scoop the remainder up from the floor that they need, and they can make their escape. In order to cover that escape, the Baron now steps forward and unleashes his Teeth of Hydra spell, which raises half a dozen skeletons up from the temple floor. Nicely done, and of course they will act as a shield to cover the necromancer's escape. There was also some searching of the temple going on. For the vampire hunters, Dr. von Franz, he has the trait of scholar, so he very quickly found and read through a couple of scrolls. One was a map, the other one was a raise dead spell, which of course he burnt. And one of the guards, Regan, also snuck into the temple as well and started rooting around for gold. Unfortunately, he didn't find any. And that was where time defeated us. Yes, we had to pack up at that point and finish the game. Well, I think once again, the halflings came off very well. They buried their gold. They had to dig it up again. They didn't really get entangled much with any of the other stuff that was going on. There was a brief shouted conversation with the necromancer. So they managed to get their gold away. They've still got the Nookie Now, the necromancer, they succeeded. They got the mummy dust, quite ironically as it happens, with the help of the vampire hunters. And I really like that neat move of summoning up the skeletons in the temple to cover their escape. The vampire hunters, well, they didn't discover Count Rammstein, but they did discover one of the brides of Rammstein. A bold attempt by Frau Blucher, but she just didn't quite make it. The vampire escaped. The guards and the barbarians continued their punch up. I think it was fairly even, maybe tipping slightly towards the guards, but one of the barbarians had gone berserk, so who knows what might have happened there. Unfortunately, as I say, we had to finish there because we ran out of time. The guy was waiting to switch the lights off and lock up, so we had to finish there. We could have gone another round, I think, maybe. It would have been nice just to resolve that fight between the barbarians and the guards. However, pretty much everyone, barring one or two casualties, survived this time, so who knows where they will be next. As far as the rules goes, as I said, I didn't really tweak the mechanics. The activation and everything else is working very nicely. My main tweak, the main thing, is on the combat, determining when someone uses an action to move in and attack someone else, does that person get an attack back? If they've already activated and used their action points, do they get an attack back? If they haven't activated, just how to work that a little more. So I want to make that a little more clear. But everything else was rolling very smoothly. The game moved nice and quickly. There were no real sticking points. And one of the ways I designed this, I mean, one of the things is if something does come up that you're not sure about, the game master just rolls a dice and makes a judgment. We've got that table for feats, you know, or you've got the save table against fear or magic or whatever. So it's a very easy thing to see. If someone's got a high agility and they want to climb up something, well, we'll make that an easy feat. We'll roll. As far as I can see at the moment, that covers pretty much every situation. Now, the other issue with filming the games, I can get a certain amount of filming done down at the club, but as I mentioned, the lighting is not that great, and obviously it's quite noisy. You know, there's 5 or 6 other games going on, which is fine. So what I'm going to do at some point, maybe not for the next test game, but certainly once the rules are ready, is I'm going to set up somewhere quiet and I'm going to film a game in progress, pretty much the whole thing, or certainly a few turns, and really go into detail on the rules and how everything works. So that will give anyone who's interested a clear indication of how the game works and how it plays out. I'd like to thank Neil, Damo, Paul, Andy and Matt again for taking part and making it such a fun game, particularly rolling those ones. It's always funny, isn't it, when someone else falls over? It's never when you fall over. But I don't know, that's just human nature, I guess. So thanks, guys. And where will they be next time? Well, I think I've got one more test game planned, and I'm looking at my Innsmouth build, and I'm starting to think, maybe it's time for these factions to take a little visit to Innsmouth. We shall see. Thanks again for watching. Do keep your comments, questions and suggestions coming in, and please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really does help the channel. See you next time.